Welcome into the ArtGibbs Sports Business Podcast. This is episode 18. In this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about Nebraska, the Big Red Confidential, and TV contracts in the NCAA. All right, well, welcome in. And again, we have our question on this board, which you cannot see if you're listening on the podcast. The question, I'll read it for you, is what company started the Tour de France? So that's the question. Please provide an answer in the comments. Leave a rating, and you can write that answer in there. The previous question, which we'll just quickly go over as a bit of housekeeping. The previous question was, who first popularized the term EBITDA, the use of EBITDA? And EBITDA, of course, is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And the answer to that was John Malone. So John Malone, again, is in previous podcasts. He's known as a great tax guy. And it was popularized, he really got his sort of blazing start in the telecommunications industry. And when he was there, he was very fond of using debt to purchase new companies or basically to purchase scale. And then that would allow him to negotiate with the studios and the content providers at a lower cost per subscriber than others. And what was happening is it was a publicly traded company, and with these acquisitions and these capital expenditures of building these new areas, or of building these new facilities and purchasing new facilities and taking out debt to do it and paying interest on the debt and all of that kind of stuff, he wasn't showing profit. That was by design, to not pay tax on the profit and to grow the scale and margin percentage. But in an effort to kind of help communicate that, and as he himself running the company was always seeking cash flow over, what was taxable earnings, he came up with the term EBITDA and began using it, and analysts began using it, and now, of course, it's extremely popular. There's even, of course, now there's EBITDAX and all this kind of stuff, and as David Einhorn would quib, it's earnings before a lot of stuff. But again, EBITDA is used a lot. It's almost, it's universally used pretty much now, and it was first popularized by John Malone. So again, he was on the episode talking about the purchase of Formula One, which we go into there, but that was the answer to the previous question. So now this one, what company started the Tour de France? So there you go. Now, like I said, we're going to talk about, and I'm going to pull this from the shelf. So this is from the shelf, Big Red Confidential, Inside Nebraska Football by Armin. I'm going to butcher this. I'm sorry. Armin Katiyan. Geez, that is just brutal. Okay, so Big Red Confidential, Inside Nebraska Football. This is a fantastic book if you haven't read it. It goes inside the old kind of Big Red machine. Nebraska football was a major college program. It was totally at the top of the sport. It had a huge rivalry with Oklahoma. And that book, which again, I'd recommend it. It's a great read. But it basically takes you inside Nebraska prior to a game against Oklahoma. And all of the stuff that happens, all of the, prep, the interviews, the town just gets electric. The people are flying in from everywhere. There's huge amount of merchandising. The local burger shop does amazing. The local merchandise shop can't keep anything on the shelves, and the stadium totally sells out and all of that kind of stuff. And it's just a massive windfall of cash for the university on that day. And when we talked to Dr. Cody Havard in a previous episode, which is it's a fantastic episode if you want to go back and look at that. But he's an expert on rivalry, And obviously one of the biggest rivalries basically in the history of college football is this Oklahoma-Nebraska rivalry. And it has been broken by conference realignment. And conference realignment has generally been driven by changes in the TV deals or the ability to change the TV deals. Just like the NFL, a major revenue source, basically half the money that's made, if not more, in some cases on some teams. Maybe Dallas, it's a little bit less than half, and maybe Oakland, it was more than half. The sort of the TV money versus the day of money and all that kind of stuff. And so, but the TV money is a massively significant portion of the NFL's earnings. Well, this is similar in college football. There's day of revenue, people coming to the games, which of course this year has totally changed. People buying stuff, people buying, trinkets going in and all of that kind of stuff. But also there's TV money. There's big Fox Saturday and CBS Fox Saturday or, whatever, ESPN games, that's okay. So the TV deals are a big part of the money. And one of the reasons almost, explicitly that Nebraska moved to the Big Ten was an increase in the annual TV revenue that they would receive as a slice of what they got from the conference. So the Big Ten and the SEC have the biggest TV deals, and we went into a little bit of that on the episode where we talked about the Big Ten and the SEC kind of staging off on who and how college football was going to be played this year. So we talked a little bit about that there, but they do have these big TV deals, and Nebraska going to the Big Ten was able to take a bigger slice. And I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think it was something like $12 or $14 million a year, something like that, more than Nebraska got. So again, it might not be exactly that, but we're talking more framework theoretical here. But that change in the TV money was a huge impetus for them to go to the Big Ten. Well, what we've seen kind of start to happen is not only are these rivalries broken, which again, in our conversation with Dr. Cody Havard, we talked about, but not only are these rivalries broken, but the recruiting has changed. There's places that were hotbeds of recruiting in Texas and those kind of places where, those recruits don't want to go up to Nebraska anymore. And the brand is not as identified with the Big Ten schools. And so there's this question that kind of comes up, and again, we touched on it with Dr. Cody Havard, but what has Nebraska given up in terms of rivalry, in terms of recruiting, in terms of national prominence, in terms of all of those things to go to the Big Ten? And I was talking with somebody, kind of, involved in athletics who quibbed, if Nebraska could take that deal back, they'd take it back in a second, and they even were talking about breaking off and playing other games outside of the Big Ten. And yet at the time they wanted to make that move. So it's an interesting thing in these TV deals and in these conference realignments where you lose these rivalries, you potentially lose these big game day revenue streams that literally are a driving force in a book like this. You lose those revenue streams, and then you replace them with a bigger TV dollar. But an additional factor that you see in college is, okay, you move your brand, and there's all of these factors that you normally have, but then additionally you lose potentially a recruiting hotbed, or you lose recruiting prowess in these areas. And sort of this idea that recruits don't know the brand as much, they don't want to play against these other teams in this other conference that they haven't been as closely associated with as potentially, the previous conference. And so that can sort of negatively affect recruiting. And, again, as you play worse and worse, that's a really bad spot to get out of. And then as you lose this recruiting prowess, you could lose your ability to compete at a high level, which of course doesn't help with national branding. It doesn't help with anything really, and you play at a lower level and sort of down you go. And so that's just something to think about. And I think the Nebraska situation is the most potent, where they had literally this sort of Duke UNC basketball rivalry, Alabama Auburn rivalry, and with Oklahoma, and they moved away from it. And potentially they're still feeling the effects of that move. Now, obviously, Nebraska, the future is still yet to be written, and see, if potentially this year they turn it around and start to build, kind of continue to build those new rivalries. But it's very interesting that, it's kind of a case study in a school that, was struggling a bit, although with Sue and those kinds of players, they did play Texas in the Big 12 championship game, but they had struggled sort of as of late there in that conference, and they made this move, and they have to establish all new rivals, and potentially it may have hurt the recruiting even more. Although again, recruiting is more national this year, but this remains to be seen. We'll see how it kind of plays out, if they can, kind of turn things around this year and move in a different direction. But again, I think it's very interesting that there's potentially a feeling of regret, even though even after taking this money. That's pretty interesting. So we'll see how it all plays out. Anyway, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, kind of expand a little bit on the conversation that we had with Dr. Cody Havard, and kind of focus on Nebraska a little bit. And again, read that Big Red Confidential if you haven't already. It's a really kind of fascinating book, and shows how big that Oklahoma-Nebraska rivalry was, and how big game day was, and how big game day revenue was, and all of that kind of stuff that goes into this, that sometimes gets overlooked in these, TV deals, and those kind of just sort of looking at the spreadsheet, what happens ongoing to the experience of the patrons on game day, to the experience of recruits watching the team, and, et cetera, et cetera. So, all right, that was a quick one. I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. Again, answer the question if you'd like. What company started the Tour de France? And you can put why. What company and why? It's a pretty basic. Why, but you could throw that in there if you'd like as well. That would be fantastic. Thanks a lot. And again, like I say, subscribe, 5-star rating. Anything is hugely beneficial this early. And you know what we'll do and that helps a lot. But you know what we'll do? If you answer this question correctly, you can put another question in there that you'd like to see us answer, and we'll do that. So how about that? Put your answer. You can put it in the comments on YouTube, or put it in the ratings on iTunes or something like that, or the Apple Podcast. Put the answer to that, and then you can ask a question. Just ask a question that you'd like to see sports business related, and we will answer it on an upcoming podcast. So that would be fantastic. Love the engagement, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.